Chapter 10:20 Means of a Demoness. As his thoughts raced, Klein suddenly switched positions with his valet, Enuni, who was in the opposite room. And under a grapevine 150 meters from the manor's main building, a slowly crawling centipede suddenly stiffened before it relaxed. Almost at the same time, its body vanished from its location. Dwayne Dante in his blue and white checkered pajamas had appeared. Klein had swapped places with his marionette again. He decided to use this method to secretly tail Kona's Kilgore and figure out where he was going or what he was planning on doing. Although he could only move 150 meters a time, and it took 2 to 3 seconds in between moves, due to the process of turning the target into a marionette, this was more concealed compared to flaming jump or teleport. It made it difficult for Kona's Kilgore to detect him. After all, he was dealing with a demigod. Even in domains where one's spiritual intuition wasn't the best, a demigod wasn't to be underestimated. By the same logic, Klein didn't rely on creeping hunger to hide in the shadows. This was because it was relatively slow even though it concealed him rather well. It was impossible for him to catch up to the demigod. Under the dark night sky, from Mager Manor to the south bank of the Tussock River, the rats, snakes, spiders, fish that were active in that stretch of land stiffened up and turned sluggish. They were converted into marionettes one after another. With their help, Klein constantly moved without causing a stir. Soon, he arrived at the south bank of the Tussock River, and after catching up to Kona's Kilgore, he maintained a distance of 1 kilometer. To a Bizarro sorcerer, even if a marionette were to go beyond his range of control, it wouldn't immediately escape from its controlled state or die immediately. Without a Bizarro sorcerer's consciousness as a catalyst, this process was rather slow and needed nearly 10 minutes. Therefore, Klein wasn't worried that he would lose Enuni, who was lying in bed, while he did his tailing. As long as he returned within 10 minutes, he could continue controlling his marionette. Silently, Klein followed Kona's Kilgore as they went upstream. Passing through the dense forest, they climbed up a mountain beside the bank. At this moment, Kona's Kilgore, who wasn't wearing a vest or coat, suddenly stopped. He checked his surroundings and widened the range of his search as though he was trying to claim his territory. Upon seeing this, Klein didn't dare stay any longer. He immediately switched places with his marionettes and retreated repeatedly, pulling away to a distance of nearly 3 kilometers from the deputy director of MI9. At this moment, he gave up control of the marionettes ahead of him. The death of a few bugs wouldn't incur any suspicion. This was all too common in the outskirts and in the forests. King of the Five Seas Nast can create a fighting environment that's favorable for him. Will Kona's Kilgore, who's also a Black Emperor pathway demigod, have the ability to demarcate such a region? He can change, boost, and use certain rules and make whoever tails him expose themselves without being able to hide? It's very possible. Klein warily took out a gold coin he placed in his pajama pocket. He ran it through his fingers and flipped it. This time, he deliberately controlled his strength and didn't produce a flicking sound. The gold coin flew up in silence and landed in his palm. Without needing to look down, the gold coin's face was naturally reflected in his mind. It was heads. This meant that the anomaly ahead contained extreme danger. As expected of a demigod. Such abilities sure are enviable. However, do you think you can avoid my tailing? Klein scoffed inwardly and found an abnormally secluded spot and made himself turn into Gehrman's sparrow. Following that, he clasped his hands and pressed it to his mouth, whispering, "Blessed of the sea and spirit world, guardian of the Rorstad archipelago, ruler of the undersea creatures, master of tsunamis and storms, the great Calvetua." After praying, Klein immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. He sat at the fool's seat and beckoned for the bone scepter with blue gems embedded at its tip. Then, with the help of his prayer, he utilized the sea god scepters responding to believers and saw the area around Gehrman's sparrow. He then raised his field of view and took in the surrounding area. Using this as the origin, he expanded his vision to 5 nautical miles. This was the limit of what the sea god scepter could observe with the help of its believers. And this way, the area where Kona's Klein had designated, one that no object could escape his notice, appeared in Klein's vision. In the dock area, inside a warehouse with plenty of goods. "Love," after Trissy chuckled. Her figure grew faint as though she was bathed in the luster of a lake at night. In the blink of an eye, Trissy, who had been bound tightly with layers of silk by demoness of unaging Katerina Pell, turned into an illusory mirror. It was a full-body mirror taller than a person. Aqueous light shimmered within as a ghostly halo grew out of it as though it was a door leading to another world. At that moment, it didn't reflect the scene in front of it. Instead, it outlined a room. The room was dimly lit. The bed and furniture had been diced up into countless small pieces which were scattered everywhere. Only the central region was spick and span. Trissy stood there, wearing a dark black dress. Her hair cascaded down smoothly as it fluttered in the wind, accentuating her face's abnormal fairness. She looked like a female ghost as spoken in folktales. She wasn't actually present and was using the illusory mirror to project her figure and strength remotely. It was as though everything was real. Therefore, she wasn't flustered at all when she was being controlled and hunted. Upon seeing this scene, Katerina Pell, who wore simple and holy white robes, didn't hesitate to let out a shriek. Invisible waves quickly spread out as her hair flared up, each strand clear and distinct. They were thick and dyed with a grayish-white color. The illusory full-body mirror suddenly vibrated and shook as though it was on the brink of breaking apart. And in the messy room it reflected, the fragments of the bed, desk, and chairs turned grayish-white, losing their luster as though they were rocks. The brownish-yellow floor in front of Trissy turned into grayish-white rocks as it quickly extended towards the only human in the room like a surging tidal wave. Trissy didn't attempt to resist as she turned around and waved her hand back while leaping towards the open window. In midair, invisible spiderwebs that belonged to her phased into existence. They turned dark as they spread towards the grayish-white colors. At the same time, the dark and profound full-body mirror produced one crack after another. Amidst illusory shattering sounds, it broke apart and vanished. However, before the full-body mirror completely vanished, the grayish-white colors receded in a strange manner inside the petrified room, materializing into a figure. The figure wore a simple, holy white robe and had luscious raven-black hair. She looked both mature and innocent, as though she had a pair of profound and childlike blue eyes. She was demoness of unaging Katerina, who had just been inside the warehouse a moment ago. Viscount Stratford could no longer see the situation inside the opposite room once the ghostly glow dissipated. He retracted his gaze and cast it onto Charmaine. He wore a mixed look in his eyes before he recovered. Trissy really was patient. To deal with me, she actually spent months to nurture a new demoness. Viscount Stratford shook his head with a chuckle. What did she want you to gain from me? At that moment, with Trissy's connection being severed, the spiderwebs around Charmaine had loosened. They were unable to bind her and restrict her freedom. This beautiful girl wore a blank expression as she replied with a vacant look in her eyes. She wanted me to know who you are truly loyal to. Without waiting for Viscount Stratford to say a word, she asked hesitantly, her eyes making it obvious that she had difficulty finding the words. How many of those promises that you made to me were real? Viscount Stratford was taken aback before he chuckled. You're probably the most silly and most naive demoness I've ever met. Charmaine's expression froze on her face as the glimmer in her eyes that she found so hard to regain faded bit by bit. Outside the warehouse, Zio and Furs were hiding in the shadows, observing the silent target area. They had followed Viscount Stratford here. Their patience had paid off, as they discovered this captain of the Royal Guard secretly leaving his mansion in the dead of the night, rushing to the dock area near the Backland Bridge. Using Zio's power as a sheriff, they followed him all the way here by keeping a huge distance between them. They had also confirmed that he had entered the warehouse in front of them. In addition, they also sensed that Viscount Stratford's condition had worsened as though he had been injured. Actually, we had the opportunity to take action while on our way here. Furs looked at the warehouse's entrance and murmured. Zio replied without looking at her. But you said it yourself that you have a nagging feeling that things aren't that simple and wanted to wait. This might be the intuition of an astrologer. It might also be an act of procrastination. Furs replied in a self-deprecating manner. They didn't say anything more as silence ruled once more. They continued waiting patiently. At this moment, a pitch-black flame was ignited on the rammed earth in front of them. The strange flames rapidly dispersed and kept close to the ground as it swept away. It then outlined a row of Loanese text. This is the chance you've been longing for. Zio's and Furs's pupils dilated at the same time. Then they looked at each other, at a loss for words. After a few seconds, Furs finally couldn't help but ask, what do we do? Chapter 1021 Zio hesitated when she heard Furs's question. We were discovered. They had said something similar before, but they were repeating it again now. However, it didn't have the same meaning. Previously, it was referring to being discovered by the guardian or monitor when she recognized Sherman. Now, the crux of the matter was that their choice and corresponding actions were expected and arranged by the person behind the scenes. They had no secrets to speak of. This meant that the chance that Xiao had been longing for might have really appeared, but what lay behind this matter was inconceivable. If we follow the intention behind this message, the final outcome will depend on whether she has good intentions, but that's not something under our control, Xiao added from a rational angle. The reason why she had used she to represent the person behind the scenes was because she had recalled the fragrance she smelled when she lost Sherman the other time. Furs listened quietly and nodded in agreement. Yes, we're too passive in this matter. The best option is to leave this place. As soon as she finished speaking, she looked at the warehouse. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything further. She was reminded of the possible situation Sherman was in, and she suspected that he was in grave danger. However, she deliberately ignored it in the end and didn't mention it. To her, Sherman was a person who existed in Xiao's descriptions. He was no different from a character in a novel. If she had the strength and opportunity to save him in passing, she was willing to do so, but to bear the risk because of that and allow her friend to be rash, putting her life in danger was definitely not something within her considerations. Xiao nodded and said, "All right, we'll leave now." However, the person who left that comment definitely wouldn't be happy to see us do so. She will definitely hinder us. Let's do it this way. We'll escape in different directions and make that person choose one person. Whoever successfully leaves this area will immediately cause a commotion and attract the official Beyonders. Why don't we directly cause a commotion here? Furs subconsciously raised a question. It will definitely be stopped or foiled. Xiao gave her excuse. Furs nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. All right, let's not delay it any further. Let's begin. Xiao didn't say another word as she took out her transparent, nearly invisible triangular blade. With her back bent, she leaped out of her hiding spot and ran out of the harbor amidst the shadows. The triangular blade was a mystical item she had spent 500 pounds through Mam Hermit to get the artisan to forge with the ancient wraith's powder and remnant spirituality. It was called Wintry Blade. Anyone hit by this weapon, even if it were a gentle touch, would be frozen stiff. They would even lose control of their thoughts as though they were possessed by a wraith. At the same time, once the battle continued, Wintry Blade's enemies would gradually have their thoughts turn sluggish and their actions become rigid and dull, even if they didn't touch the triangular blade. And Wintry Blade's negative effects wasn't that terrifying. Furthermore, there was only one. The wielder would slowly lose their body temperature and transform into an undead. Once a certain time limit was exceeded, this process would become irreversible. Therefore, Xiao had recently enjoyed jogging more or riding a bicycle at lightning speeds to generate heat to resist the loss of temperature. But even so, she had only managed to extend the time it took before she kept Wintry Blade away from her body from 3 hours to 4 hours. After running a certain distance, Xiao turned back and realized that Furs had already passed through a wall and departed. She had vanished from where they were hiding. After staring for 2 seconds, Xiao bit her lip and suddenly turned around and changed direction. She headed straight for the warehouse. Soon, she arrived beside her destination, but she wasn't in a rush to enter. She looked up and observed the area above her, seemingly trying to find another passageway, one that was less noticeable to the people inside. At that moment, her keen senses made her turn her head and see a figure appear around the corner of the wall. The figure wore a black dress with a head of brown, curly hair. She had a pair of light blue eyes. It was none other than Furs Wall. "Didn't you leave?" Despite being surprised, Xiao didn't forget to lower her voice. Furs curled her lips and said, "Weren't you fleeing too?" Xiao was momentarily at a loss for words. After a few seconds she asked, "How did you notice it? You didn't even mention Sherman. That's completely unlike you. I've already prepared a reason to persuade you." Furs quickly replied. Xiao was taken aback as she said with a complicated expression, "You didn't have to come back." Furs ignored her and pressed on the wall of the warehouse and said, "If we keep talking, perhaps we will no longer need to be stumped because it would already be over." "Man, I actually didn't think of such a good idea just now. I should have immediately insisted on going with you to save her. You definitely would have persuaded me otherwise and would think of doing it yourself. If we repeated the conversation a few times, everything would have ended on its own." Xiao gave her friend a look and, without any hesitation, stood by her side with Wintry Blade in hand. Furs immediately flipped Laymono's travels and augmented her friend with beyond her powers. Then, she put away the spellbook and grabbed Zio's shoulder with one hand, pressing the other on the wall again. While Zio was waiting for door opening, she realized that Furs hadn't immediately used her powers. This best-selling author took a deep breath and quickly said, "After entering, we'll hide and observe. After confirming that there's a chance to do something, we'll take action. If there's really no chance, or if we can't seize an opportunity for sure, we'll leave as soon as possible. That way, we can at least avenge Sherman and not be buried alive with him. Only by being alive will all kinds of possibilities open up for us." Zio immediately nodded and replied in a stern manner, "Okay." Furs wanted to say a few more words, but considering how she had wasted some time and couldn't afford to waste any more time, she opened the illusory door and passed through the wall with Zio, coming behind a row of wooden crates. With her no longer being a greenhorn in such operations, she instinctively crouched down and pulled out Laymono's travels and flipped to a particular page. Zio similarly didn't dash in. She bent down and moved her eyes to a gap between the crates and observed the empty region. The female-looking Sherman was sitting on a wooden crate without any signs of anger. Her brown hair was gently fluttering in the wind. And standing in front of her was Viscount Stratford. This captain of the Royal Guards tightened his collar and was surveying the area, a mystery as to what he was looking for. "Unfortunately, you're only a demoness. Don't worry. I will let you die without any pain. You will be completely purified." As he spoke, he took out an item from his inner pocket. Zio used her enhanced vision from the interrogator potion, and she clearly identified the item. It was a cross accessory covered in bronze. There were a few sharp, jagged protrusions, looking as though it had once impaled someone. Its style and characteristics were things that the various nations in the Fifth Epoch's northern continent didn't possess. It exuded ancient vibes. "Very good. You know that resistance is futile," Viscount Stratford said as he pressed one of the fingers he used to hold the bronze cross onto the spike. His bright red blood immediately flowed out and was absorbed by the spike, seeping into the object. The mottled bronze on the cross's surface disintegrated, revealing a corporeal form beneath that was a blob of light. In just a second or two, the item Viscount Stratford held had turned into a resplendent cross. It emitted a pure and flawless glow, illuminating the surroundings in an abnormally bright manner. The wooden crate's shadows quickly receded as the dark splotches on the wall evaporated like water. Beside Charmaine, the countless spiderwebs that originally belonged to Trissy floated up and struggled in the fire, melting in just mere seconds. The light grew brighter, but they weren't blinding. Black flames burst out of Charmaine's body along with crystalline ice. They turned dim, transparent, and eventually vanished under the illumination. Within the range of the resplendent cross, there weren't any traces of evil or abnormalities present. Not 1 inch of darkness remained. Seeing Sherman's expression slowly distort, Zio couldn't help but shoot Furs a glance. She could clearly sense the terror of the resplendent cross, and she was beginning to waver about saving her. Furs also noticed what was happening and pointed to Laymono's travels. She raised her left index finger and whispered into Zio's ear, "There's only one chance. I will work hard to create it for you. If it's not successful, or if you can't be certain of it, we will give up." Zio didn't hesitate as she nodded solemnly. Furs immediately straightened her body and flipped Laymono's travels to the charred yellow page. This page was filled with complicated, twisted, indescribable symbols and labels. It gave one the feeling of a strong gust of wind. Sailor Pathway's demigod power. Hurricane. After observing her surroundings once again and confirming that there weren't any other enemies, Furs's gaze penetrated through the gap in between the wooden crates and locked onto Viscount Stratford. She then slid her finger gently across the charred yellow page. With an exploding whoosh, a visible hurricane soared up beneath Viscount Stratford's feet and rushed upwards. The captain of the Royal Guards wasn't able to maintain his balance from this sudden attack. He was lifted up by the hurricane and was slammed into the warehouse's ceiling. Boom! The warehouse's ceiling was torn apart by the hurricane as portions of it collapsed. Some of the fragments spun around amidst the wind as they flew higher and higher. Viscount Stratford nearly fainted from being slammed, and he failed to hold onto the resplendent cross, allowing it to fly out of his palm. When the spike with a sliver of his blood left his finger, the mottled bronze covered the cross's surface once more. The flawless light vanished in turn. Upon seeing this, Zio didn't hesitate to rush out of her hiding spot. Her eyes first reflected Viscount Stratford's figure before two blinding bolts of lightning lit up. Psychic piercing. 10:22 Answer. Amidst the violent hurricane, Viscount Stratford was like a helpless leaf that was pitifully thrown about as though he could be torn to pieces at any moment. In this state, he couldn't react at all, much less speak. All he could do was rely on a disciplinary paladin's powerful body to barely hold on, hoping that he wouldn't lose a limb or head inside this terrifying hurricane. He originally believed that the hunt had succeeded and that Trissy's capture was at hand. Furthermore, he was extremely certain that his target didn't have helpers. Hence, all his attention was focused on Charmaine. To his surprise, he suddenly became the prey and fell into a trap without any prior warning. Upon realizing that the hurricane was beginning to weaken and that he had only suffered some damage from the impact and didn't receive any fatal wounds, Viscount Stratford hurriedly tried to regain control of his body in preparation for the upcoming battle. At that moment, he felt a stabbing pain in his head which felt as though a sharp dagger had been impaled into it before being twisted a few times. This feeling was something that Viscount Stratford felt was both familiar and unfamiliar. This was because, although he had never experienced it directly before, he had attempted it on several targets to observe their reactions. This was one of the Beyonder powers he was most proficient with. Psychic piercing. Bang! Upon being attacked, Viscount Stratford, who had failed to adjust his physical state, slammed into the ground hard as the bronze cross loudly fell several meters away. Tap, tap, tap. Zio held Wintry Blade and took a huge stride, dashing straight for Viscount Stratford who was struggling to get up. As for Furs, she had already flipped through Lamino's travels and flipped it open to a page that resembled a goatskin parchment. As her fingers slid across the page, Viscount Stratford's shadows, which had surfaced once again, came to life, condensing into black chains that wrapped around its target, binding him tightly. Viscount Stratford, who had just managed to catch his breath and become alert, still hadn't had the opportunity to choose the target for his punishment and apply certain restrictions when he once again lost his freedom. Even his mouth was bound by a shadow chain. Abyss chains. It was abyss chains from the Sanguine or Moon Pathways mid-sequence Beyonders. Furs had used it once and was rather fond of this Beyonder power. She found it very useful, so she had spent gold pounds to get Mr. Moon, who had become a Viscount, to record it. Bang! At this moment, Viscount Stratford suddenly unleashed power that surpassed his previous strength, tearing the shadow chains apart. He had chosen the bindings, restricting him to be the target of punishment. But at that moment, Zio had already rushed in front of him like a high-speed train, thrusting that transparent triangular blade. Amidst a splotching sound, the wintry blade stabbed into the target's abdomen. Viscount Stratford's body stiffened once again as his eyes glazed over as though he had turned into an ice sculpture. Zio released her hand and allowed Wintry Blade to remain stabbed into the stomach of the captain of the Royal Guards, seemingly hoping that the wraith which might have existed on the weapon would continue possessing her target and forcibly bring him under control. Right on the heels of that, she swung her arm and slammed a punch right below Viscount Stratford's ear. After two heavy blows, Viscount Stratford fainted without even letting out a grunt. His stiff body collapsed once again. After completing this strike, Zio left her back to Furs and immediately moved past the staggering Viscount Stratford, who had Wintry Blade in his stomach, and dashed to Sherman who remained sitting on a wooden crate. Furs flipped through Lamino's travels once again, using other Beyonder powers to add another layer of restrictions onto Viscount Stratford's body. Then, she walked out of the row of wooden crates she had been hiding behind and first approached that bronze ancient cross. The scene she saw made her suspect that it was an item at the demigod level. In the parlance of official Beyonders, it was a Grade 1 sealed artifact. And with Viscount Stratford carrying and using it, she believed that the negative effects of the cross weren't that direct. She could attempt to pick it up. Of course, as a former astrologer, Furs took out the pure crystal ball as she walked, quickly doing a divination. There are no problems. Furs glanced at the outcome and quickened her pace. At this moment, Zio had already rushed in front of Sherman. Looking at this friend who had turned rather beautiful, she was momentarily at a loss for words. To her, Sherman's condition was in a terrible state. This demoness hair was floating up with each strand turning thick as if they were tiny snakes. On the ends of the tiny snakes, some had eyes or mouths. They appeared extremely bizarre and terrifying. On Sherman's face, a black paint-like mysterious pattern suffused out of her skin and was rapidly spreading across her body. Her slightly vacant eyes quickly reflected Zio as she gradually recovered her spirit and, along with that, also came a little confusion and pain. She opened her mouth and stuttered. Xiao? I'm in so much pain. Xiao's vision instantly blurred. Although she was still lacking in many of the details regarding the mysterious world's general knowledge, since the Tarot Club's discussion was just way over her head, and the information she got from MI9 was mostly about secret organizations, she still knew quite a bit about losing control. Among unaffiliated Beyonders, it was something that couldn't be avoided. Therefore, Xiao knew that Sherman was beginning to lose control. It was irreversible, and the situation would only worsen. Sherman seemed to sense her state as she gasped for breath, revealing a weak smile. She said with difficulty, "Kill me. I've done too many unspeakable sins. I've also obtained what I've wanted." Xiao's tears dripped down. Without hesitation, she flipped her hand, drawing her backup weapon, an ordinary revolver. She then placed the revolver at Sherman's forehead. Sherman smiled as a mesmerizing charm appeared in her eyes once again. "Call me. Call me Shermaine. Shermaine." Xiao couldn't help but frown as tears brimmed in her eyes. Bang, bang, bang. She repeatedly pulled the trigger and fired the bullets inside. Fresh flowers bloomed at once, red and beautiful. Furs pursed her lips unknowingly when she saw this. After 2 seconds, she let out a long sigh. She bent down and reached out for the bronze cross. Just as her fingers touched the item, it felt like she had touched fire. It was hot and scalding, hot enough to burn the soul. Furs instinctively retracted her hand, feeling alarmed and puzzled. She remembered that Viscount Stratford had never acted in such a manner before. As her thoughts raced, Furs glanced at Viscount Stratford and kicked the bronze cross towards the nearby Xiao. "Give it a try. Also, we have to leave immediately. The commotion from earlier will definitely attract the official Beyonders. Also, who knows what the person who left the message will do." Xiao, with her reddened eyes, didn't say a word. She bent down and picked up the bronze cross. She didn't feel any sense of discomfort the entire time. Furs didn't ask why as she walked to the stiff Viscount Stratford's body and warily looked around. After Xiao put away the bronze cross, she picked up Shermaine's corpse and returned to Viscount Stratford's side. "That item is very precious. His status is also very important. We'll definitely be the targets of the royal family's pursuit efforts. We need to do some interference." Furs looked down at Viscount Stratford as she muttered to herself in thought. She quickly made a decision. She raised her hands, lowered her head, and began piously chanting Mr. Fool's honorific name. She didn't believe that them giving up the bronze cross would stop the royal family from pursuing them due to being perceived to have lower priority. Therefore, without any hesitation, she prayed to Mr. Fool for help. To her, sacrificing the item to Mr. Fool was better than staying there. Almost at the same time, she saw a holy angel with 12 pairs of fiery wings. A phantom projected out of the angel as it descended from the sky, wrapping her and Xiao in layers of flaming wings. Once this was over, Furs was just about to say something when she felt her body quiver. She felt a particular sense of horror and evil permeate from the void. Her eyes focused as she didn't hesitate to crouch down, reaching out her hands and grabbing Xiao and Viscount Stratford's calf. At the same time, the final dark green stone with burn marks on her bracelet emitted a blue and illusory light. In the blink of an eye, the bodies of Furs, Xiao, Viscount Stratford, and Shermaine turned transparent as they vanished from the spot. In seconds, they left the docks area and appeared on the outskirts of St. George Borough. During this process, Furs had even used her Beyonder power as ascribed to record traveling. After observing her surroundings and confirming that there was no one around since they were in the forests, Furs released Xiao and Viscount Stratford and straightened her body. With the blessings of Mr. Fool's angel, there shouldn't be much danger. The person who left the message won't be able to lock onto us. Furs heaved a sigh of relief before saying with a lingering sense of fear, "The person who descended upon us towards the end was definitely a saint. Thankfully, we quickly escaped." Xiao gently lowered Shermaine's corpse and said in thought, "If the person who left the message was monitoring Shermaine, then she might have already found out where we live. We can't return there." "Yes, we need to change our residence," Furs said with great experience. Then, she cast her gaze at the unconscious Viscount Stratford. "You can interrogate him now. Make every second count." As she spoke, she handed Lamino's travels to Xiao and exhorted, "There's telepathy on it and it's used with candlelight. Also, start with the simple and unimportant questions to lower his resistance." Xiao received the spellbook with a solemn expression. However, her wrist trembled, unable to hold Laymanose Travels. Pah! The bronze notebook dropped onto the ground as Xiao said with a frown, "It's like fire." Furs had the same experience earlier, so after some thought she said, "Throw that cross away and try again." Xiao followed her suggestion and successfully picked up Laymanose Travels. "It cannot be held with other mystical items," Furs said with a nod when she saw this. Xiao didn't harp on this problem as she quickly prepared a lit candle. Then, she drew Wintry Blade and relieved Viscount Stratford from his stiff and dazed state. After the captain of the Royal Guards gradually awakened, she triggered the corresponding page in the notebook. Viscount Stratford instantly fell into confusion, and only the faint candlelight remained in his eyes. "Why did Charmaine try to approach you?" Xiao asked the question she had just thought of. Viscount Stratford replied blankly, "She was investigating who I'm loyal to." Xiao was taken aback as she instinctively asked, "Who are you really loyal to?" Viscount Stratford slowly said, "His Majesty, of course." Chapter 1023 Mason Dear's Death. His Majesty. Xiao was a little confused and filled with confusion when she heard Viscount Stratford's reply. She found it inexplicable that Charmaine would deliberately approach this captain of the Royal Guards just to investigate where his loyalties lay. This didn't seem to be something of great importance or value. As for Viscount Stratford's answer, it was very normal and without any faults. Charmaine paid with her life for such an answer? Xiao originally wished to press for the reason behind Charmaine's investigation of such a trivial matter, but she immediately realized that it might involve key intel too soon. It might cause Viscount Stratford, who hadn't entered the necessary state, to put up resistance. So she gradually held back her instinctive urge. She thought for a moment and asked, "Do you know Mason Dear?" "Yes," Viscount Stratford answered blankly. Xiao Derricha continued asking rather simple and unimportant questions. "Who is he?" "He's the former captain of the Royal Guards," Viscount Stratford answered simply without elaborating. At this moment, Furs didn't listen to the telepathy at such a superficial layer. She took out the pure crystal ball and placed it in Xiao's pocket. After transferring her items, she bent down once again and carefully attempted to pick up the bronze cross. This time, amidst her trembling fingers, the soul-burning feeling didn't assault her. It allowed her to easily pick up the spiky item. As expected, this cross cannot coexist with other mystical items. I still have Moon Paper figurine and the remnant spirituality of the ancient wraiths, but it didn't react. This means that it can coexist with items that don't contain Beyonder characteristics, but won't resist spirituality and strength? If that's the case, will it also reject the Beyonder characteristic within my body? But it doesn't seem obvious. This is its other negative side effect, and it requires some time before it shows signs? Furs had a general idea about this ancient bronze cross. She then warily stored it away in a bag that contained all kinds of ritual materials. After doing this, Furs looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist. She confirmed that it was completely empty and was without any accessories hanging from it. She had used up all 5 stones that allowed her to use teleport. However, Furs no longer felt as anxious as before. Although she believed that the full moon ravings would become clearer and more terrifying with the usage of each stone, she also knew that with Mr. Fool's help, this wasn't a problem. Over the past year, if not for her need to spend some time above the gray fog during every full moon or blood moon, she would have almost forgotten that she was suffering the torment from the full moon ravings. I hope that the curse will be lifted one day. After retracting her gaze from the dull silver bracelet, Furs couldn't help but sigh. She then sincerely thanked Mr. Fool in her heart. No matter what his real goal is, he has rescued me time and time again. It hasn't only been from the full moon ravings. This cross's level doesn't seem low. I wonder if Mr. Fool will be interested and is willing to accept my sacrifice. I didn't have any good items or news to repay him for his benevolence. I finally see an opportunity. This is a common spoil of war. I only own half of it. I wonder if Mr. Fool is willing to accept a sacrifice that I only have half the rights to. No, Xiao has also been rescued by Mr. Fool before. Perhaps it might please Mr. Fool. If he is satisfied, he might produce a few Beyonder powers and allow me to record them in Laymanose Travels. No, Laymanose Travels might not be able to record a deity's powers. It won't be able to withstand Mr. Fool's powers. The powers of the angels under him will do too. No, 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 I can't be too greedy. I'll be satisfied if Mr. World can demonstrate some of his powers for me to record. Furza's thoughts wandered as she had expectations akin to a dream. This was the instinct of a best-selling author. As for why she didn't expect anything else other than the recording of Beyonder powers, it was because she realized today how important and terrifying Beyonder powers at the demigod level were. If Lamino's travels didn't have Hurricane recorded, she and Zio might not have been able to capture Viscount Stratford. They might not even succeed in escaping. Even if she didn't include the Bronze Cross, Viscount Stratford himself was a rather powerful Beyonder. If he hadn't been injured by Hurricane in the beginning and left dizzy from the fall, their sneak attacks might not have reached this level of success. There was a high chance that they might suffer a counterattack. Of course, separating the resplendent cross from Viscount Stratford was key to the victory of this brief battle tonight. And again, this was all thanks to Hurricane. On careful thought, if we switch to a less pressing situation, and if the Bronze Cross and the demigod powers in the notebook were excluded, Zio and I might have a chance of defeating Viscount Stratford together. We might even have quite good odds. The Beyonder powers recorded in the notebook are varied, and when put together, they're truly powerful. Together with Zio's psychic piercing and the effects of Wintry Blade, in a head-on battle, it's reasonable for Viscount Stratford to be defeated if he doesn't have any special mystical items. A living scribe with rich experience is actually this powerful. The more Furs thought, the stranger she felt. She realized that she had become rather formidable. Back when they were dealing with the ancient Wraith, she had already come to a similar conclusion. And this time, their enemy, Viscount Stratford, was the captain of the royal guards of the lone royal family. He was at least sequence 6 and was probably sequence 5. Furthermore, he wielded an item at the demigod level. The level of his strength was clear, so this immediately allowed Furs to benchmark her level in the world of Beyonders. Although their victory mainly stemmed from a sneak attack, a successful one was also a manifestation of one's strength. I'm already a scribe. With a good combination of powers, together with Lamino's travels, I'm already a rather strong sequence 5. The only problem is that I lack experience. As Furs reflected poignantly, she cast her gaze at Zio and Viscount Stratford, continuing to listen to their questions and answers. At this moment, Zio's question had already reached a rather key topic that could easily result in resistance. How did Mason Deer die? After asking this question, Zio's expression suddenly turned complicated and expectant. She was also in a dilemma, feeling pangs of excitement and fear. This was a question she wished to ask 8 years ago. In these nearly 3,000 days, she had been constantly searching for an answer, but she was also afraid that the answer wasn't something she expected. She was afraid that her father was really involved in a mutiny and thus was executed, marring his reputation. Viscount Stratford didn't immediately answer Zio's question. He seemed to struggle before saying, "He discovered His Majesty's secret and tried informing the 3 churches but failed. He was executed on the spot." Zio fell into a daze for a few seconds before finally confirming the answer she received. Although this answer shocked her, it made the heart in her mouth sink back to its original position as she calmed down. "Secret. His Majesty's secret," she muttered softly to herself and asked in a pressing tone, "What secret?" Furs, who was beside her, was also shocked to the point of being dumbfounded. She never expected things to develop to this stage. At that moment, Viscount Stratford's facial muscles visibly contorted. It took him a great deal of effort to say a few words. "That secret is..." Suddenly, his body jerked violently. His confused eyes regained their luster. Right on the heels of that, his body collapsed from the most minute part, instantly transforming into a ball of fireworks. The blood-red fireworks soared into the sky and exploded, illuminating the night sky as they were reflected in Furs's and Zio's eyes. Having experienced this previously, Furs didn't waste any time after her eyes momentarily blanked out. She immediately crouched down and grabbed Charmaine's corpse and Zio's calf. Their figures swiftly turned transparent as they vanished from the spot, teleporting to the southern area of the bridge. Above the gray fog, Klein, who was holding the sea god's scepter, saw the fireworks that stained the sky red. Back when Furs prayed to him, he had happened to be inside the magnificent palace observing Kona's Kilgore's actions. He conveniently took in the red priest card and used the paper figurine he cut, stirred the powers of the mysterious space, and gave a response. During this process, he discovered that the person lying next to Miss Magician and Miss Judgment was Viscount Stratford. This was one of the targets he had placed great importance on. Although he hadn't investigated him personally, he knew that there was something wrong with him. He knew that Demonis Trissy was targeting him, so he had remembered his appearance and characteristics at a ball. Klein didn't know what the two Tarot Club members were up to, but since it involved Viscount Stratford, he definitely didn't write off its importance. He directly observed what subsequently happened to Miss Magician and Miss Judgment through the Crimson Stars. After advancing to a demigod and obtaining even more authorities, he didn't need the Tarot Club members to pray to directly observe their vicinity via the Crimson Star. This was similar to specially marking out believers, but Klein had always held great restraint towards that and had never attempted it. This made him hear Zio's and Viscount Stratford's conversation. And since he knew the underlying truth, he knew very well what the true meaning and importance of who he was loyal to was. Combined with the discovery of the king's secret by the former captain of the Royal Guards, Mason Deer, and how his attempt to inform the three churches failed, Klein already had a guess. He suspected that the greatest culprit behind the Great Smog of Backlund was the Lone Kingdom's king, George III. 1024 Traditional skills inside the palace above the grey fog. Klein, who was holding the sea god's scepter, looked at the Black Emperor card and the Tyrant card on the table in front of him with a heavy look. Although Viscount Stratford's answer could only prove that King George III hid a great secret, had played a crucial role in the Great Smog of Backlund, and was highly likely to be a mass murderer, it couldn't be said that he had spearheaded everything and was the true mastermind. After all, he might only be a puppet. But to Klein, this was already enough. The target was clear, and he had clues to investigate what they were planning. Seeing that Miss Magician and Miss Judgment had left the area where the abnormality had happened and were practically safe, Klein retracted his gaze and continued to observe the actions of MI9 Deputy Director, Konas Kilgore, via prayer vision. After a while, after securing the territory and confirming that no one was tailing him, Konas Kilgore walked to a mountain wall and took out an object. His entire body was tainted with a ghostly blue glow as he gradually became hazy and blurry. Then, he disappeared into thin air, his whereabouts unknown. A rather special form of traveling via corporeal ritual or item that allows him to teleport from point to point within a very short distance. Back when I came out from the underground ruins wherein Zangwil was, I also passed through a similar door. Yes, this place isn't too far from the mountain where Mr. A pursued me. This setup needs a very suitable and secretive region. Without having any permission from the interior, just holding onto an activation item might not have any effect. And once something happens, destroying the corresponding ritual can prevent enemies from entering and stop them from finding the exact location. Klein nodded in enlightenment. Combining the information which Viscount Stratford had just revealed, he had come to the initial conclusion that the king's secret and the ploy by the three factions were all hidden deep within the underground ruins. As long as one entered, the truth would be obtained through a careful investigation. However, the difficulty in performing the investigations became apparent the more he thought about it. He had to first obtain the corresponding item and, using his disguise as a faceless to fool the guards, he would teleport in. None of these steps were easy. According to Rhodes, Konas Kilgore wasn't just a demigod of the Black Emperor pathway, he also possessed a rather powerful sealed artifact. Even if Klein had made preparations, his odds of defeating the Brigadier General of MI9 wasn't too high if he didn't seek the help of angels, much less finish him off in a stealthy manner without anyone realizing it. Furthermore, there were many difficulties in getting the help of an angel, as all of them had their own extenuating circumstances that prevented them from agreeing. Even if I take down Konas Kilgore without drawing the attention of anyone, I have to consider the danger that stems from entering. Based on what previously happened, it's impossible for them to not be on guard against a faceless. A cooperation effort between the king, the psychology alchemists, and the Demonis sect guarantees that their ploy is significant. It's extremely possible that there's an angel within the underground ruins. Klein frowned as he was at a loss for a reliable angle for investigation. He tapped the edge of the long mottled table and decided to break out of the confines of his original thoughts and consider it from a different angle. A few seconds later, a flash of inspiration came to him. Why do I want to complete all these steps by myself? The king's secret and plans are likely detrimental to the three churches of Storm, Evernight, and Steam. Otherwise, the former captain of the Royal Guards, Mason Deer, wouldn't have attempted to inform the three churches. As a blessed of the Evernight goddess, at least for now, isn't it obvious what I should be doing? This can also count towards my contributions to exchange for the Scholar of Your Potion formula. In an instant, Klein's thoughts became extremely clear. He left the area above the gray fog without any hesitation and returned to the real world. Dressed in blue and white checkered pajamas, Gehrman Sparrow raised his hands once more and made a prayer gesture. He chanted in ancient Hermes, the ever-night goddess who stands higher than the cosmos and more eternal than eternity. You are also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of Concealment, the Empress of Misfortune and Horror, Mistress of Repose and Silence. This time, Klein didn't hold a ritual because he wasn't praying for a bestowment or response. All he wanted was to simply describe what Viscount Stratford had said, as well as his observations regarding Kona's Kilgore. Therefore, a direct prayer was sufficient. After praying, Klein exhaled and stood in a remote area of the woods, patiently awaiting the possible developments. In less than a minute, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him, like a quickly sketched portrait. The newcomer was dressed in a simple robe. By the figure's waist was a belt made of tree bark. Long hair cascaded down as the figure was barefoot. She had a pair of dark and serene eyes, and she was none other than the highest-ranking archbishop and leader of the ascetics, servant of concealment, Ariana. Good evening, Ma'am Ariana. Klein bowed without any hint of surprise. Ariana glanced at him and returned the greeting. Good evening. She didn't make any small talk as she directly asked. Kona's Kilgore is nearby? Yes, less than 10 kilometers away. Klein pointed in the direction. He has already used an item to vanish from his place. What should we do next? Ariana nodded slightly and said, wait for him to come out and find an opportunity to capture him. Isn't that too direct? You look quiet and plain, a cultured person. No, Angel. Why are you so aggressive? If Kona's Kilgore didn't head for the underground ruins and had gone to some other secret base, or if he wasn't too deeply involved in the king's ploys, to have the church's archbishop taking action on MI9's top brass would definitely be breaking news. The kingdom's fracturing would only worsen. Klein was momentarily unsure how he should respond to Ariana. Although he would definitely attack Kona's Kilgore if he handled the matter himself, since the latter's involvement in the slave trade and the silencing of others was enough reason, the problem was that a demigod of a secret organization attacking a military top brass and an Orthodox church's archbishop attacking a military top brass was two completely different matters. As though sensing Klein's thoughts, Ariana calmly explained, you will be the one taking action, not me. Klein was a little unused to her style. Ariana continued, I will create a concealed world for you and provide you the necessary assistance. Battle in a concealed state? Fight with the help of an angel? Klein nodded with a thought. Then where shall the ambush be? Ariana answered succinctly, in your mager manner. I share the same thoughts. But I didn't want to say it myself. Klein took a deep breath and exhaled. The choice for the ambush location stemmed from very simple logic. It was to do it when Kona's Kilgore was in his most relaxed and defenseless state. Without a doubt, once Kona's finishes his secret mission and returns to Mager Manor, he would believe that the most risky matters of the night were over. He wouldn't have his guard up. For the same reason, if the king's secret employ was of utmost importance, it was possible for an angel to be watching over him while he returned from the underground ruins. Once he suffered an attack, the angel would be able to immediately respond. And only when Kona's returned to his normal daily routine would the monitoring be retracted. After all, there were only a limited number of angels, so it was impossible for them to be so free. Thankfully, I used the most covert method of tailing him, and the distance was far enough. From the looks of it, Ma'am Ariana didn't place the responsibility of the battle onto me to avoid the risk and reduce the negative effects, but because maintaining a concealed state and preventing the existence inside the underground mints from noticing the battle will drain a great deal of her energy. Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein had a better idea of how he should proceed. At this moment, Ariana added, the concealed world's battle won't damage the real world. That's pretty good. Klein muttered silently and said after some thought, then I need to immediately make some preparations. All right, Ariana calmly replied. She didn't even ask me what preparations I need. I was even prepared to say that I need a change of clothes. As Klein lampooned himself, he looked down at his blue and white checkered pajamas. His left palm quickly turned transparent as he vanished from the spot. Inside Mager Manor, Klein's figure blinked into existence. Maintaining his appearance as Gehrman Sparrow, he quickly changed his clothes and wore a top hat. Following that, he took out a piece of paper and used his finger to write. The tip of his finger spewed out a scarlet flame, leaving charred marks without burning the piece of paper. The charred marks quickly formed a complicated symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. With the formation of this symbol, the full-body mirror in the room turned dark as aqueous light rippled. A silver outline appeared, forming one word after another. Exalted Great Master, your loyal and resilient servant, Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. Do you have something you would like to ask me? Yes. Klein nodded and looked out the window. What demigod powers and powerful sealed artifacts does Konas Kilgore have? This was something he vaguely knew before. After confirming that Konas Kilgore was a target, he gathered more information and now wished to know more so as to prepare a strategy meant to target Konas. The full-body mirror's silver words warped and squirmed, quickly forming new words. Great Master, Konas Kilgore is an Earl of the Fallen. To hide his strength, he wields a sealed artifact that also belongs to the lawyer pathway. However, it also has some of the arbiter pathway's characteristics mixed into it. It's called Chapter 1025 Random Anomalies. The full-body mirror's silver words seem to have a life of their own as they vanished and reformed. The Concerto of Light and Shadow is a pocket watch. It can restrict certain actions in a particular area, and it can also strip certain beyonder powers from the target. When the two are put together, the limitations that are created far exceed the two types. The Concerto of Light and Shadow is also able to gift certain negative side effects to the target, making him sluggish, eager, avaricious, or lose their fighting spirit, only capable of focusing his attention on money. Apart from these effects, the sealed artifact's wielder would have the ability to distort the target's speech, actions, intentions, and attacks. It can reduce a lethal blow into a serious injury, or it could repel an attack, turning progression into retrogression, escaping into leading a charge. The negative effects of Concerto of Light and Shadow are rather serious. Amongst them, the main negative effect to take note of is that once it's brought into combat, all the beyonder effects produced in a certain region would intermittently experience random anomalies. It wouldn't distinguish between friend or foe, making it hard to control and unpredictable. That also means that lightning strike might still create a bolt of lightning, but it might splash the target with a blast of cold water or summon unknown spirit world creatures. Due to this reason, Konas Kilgore has deliberately sought out a mystical item that can make him sufficiently lucky at critical moments, hoping that the random intermittent effects will benefit himself. It's definitely useful to a certain extent, but it's not that great. Konas Kilgore also has a strange revolver. It originated from an anomaly during an evil god's sacrifice. It's called Rever's Shout of Despair. It can shoot without bullets, and each shot possesses immense strength. It can shoot at a rapid pace like a miniature machine gun. Targets who are hit by it will suffer Rever's Shout of Despair before he died. They will suffer different levels of pain, dizziness, and confusion. The biggest problem with the revolver is that the wielder will also hear the shout of despair. It just won't be too frequent. As an Earl of the Fallen, Konas Kilgore no doubt has a qualitative change when it comes to distortion and the unreasonable bestowment. In addition, he can also exploit laws and magnify effects, and use disorder to disrupt order. Exploit can extend certain states for longer periods of time or end it ahead of time. It will make the rules more beneficial to himself. For example, after jumping into midair, the state of being away from the ground can be extended, achieving the effect of floating. Magnify can boost the effects or influence of his actions. It can make an ordinary attack become an execution. It can turn a hug from a distance away into a restriction. Disorder will influence the structure of objects, the standards of measurement, and the accuracy of attacks. It will make a seemingly massive building collapse, causing what seems like a huge distance to be shortened to that of a few paces, as well as allowing attacks that are aimed at him to miss their mark. Through magnify, exploit, and distortion, beyonders of the lawyer pathway can achieve certain things that only beyonders of the arbiter pathway can accomplish. Of course, low and mid-sequence beyonder powers of the lawyer pathway like bribe are equally possessed by an Earl of the Fallen and are even stronger. Great Master, I've finished answering your question. Is that okay? Your answer is like a guidebook. You must have been gathering information from the spirit world while delivering it. Also, must you seek praise even for matters such as this? Klein lampooned and nodded slightly. That's right. After answering Rhodes's question, he quickly got into the zone as he analyzed the powers and traits of the powerful sealed artifact which the demigod, Konas Kilgore, had. An Earl of the Fallen is indeed a Sequence 4 demigod existence. There are qualitative changes in various aspects. Be it bestowment, distortion, exploit, and magnify, none of them are easy to deal with. I might suffer if I'm careless. Rather, disorder isn't terrifying. It's basically an enhanced version of the Sequence 5 Mentor of Confusion's power. The Concerto of Light and Shadow does have traits of the Arbiter domain. And the most frustrating aspect about it is the negative side effects. To a Beyonder of the Seer pathway, my combat style is definitely closer to one of preparation, precision, and control. Once the battle begins, the moves will chain one after another. During this process, if a random deviation were to happen, the entire plan can easily be messed up and not be accomplished. It's very dangerous. As he thought, Klein discovered that the main problem stemmed from the sealed artifact named Concerto of Light and Shadow. As a Beyonder who liked setting up traps for his enemy, Klein didn't wish that after throwing himself into a perilous situation through his painstaking planning and hard work, he would realize that the item would summon a rabbit just as he was using the Fate Siphon charm to switch fates with his target to turn the tables and finish off his opponent. Or perhaps it would turn into fireworks to celebrate the death of the user. Kona's Kilgore can reduce the effects by raising his luck, but I can't do it. Fortune or misfortune that's not at the angel level won't be effective on me. However, I have the marionette. Winner Anuni. Klein thought as he gave a Rhodes the second question. How can the intermittent random anomalies of that sealed artifact be avoided? Silver words appeared out of the ripples of the deep mirror, forming a new sentence. There's no need to avoid it. Kona's Kilgore just needs to become unlucky, and for this, the demigods of the Evernight pathway are experts. Makes sense. According to the theory of relativity, as long as Kona's Kilgore is more unlucky than me, I'll be the lucky one. Ma Mariana said that she can provide me with assistance. To her, secretly slipping some misfortune onto Kona's Kilgore before creating the concealed state should be very simple and easy. Klein immediately nodded cheerfully. Very good. That's it for today. I'll summon you again if there's anything else. Yes, Master. No problem, Master. Goodbye. Master Dash, on the full-body mirror's surface was a simple drawing followed by silver words. Seeing the mirror instantly return to normal, Klein retracted his gaze and quickly simulated the battle that would happen in his mind. Gradually, he came up with an idea, and grabbing onto that flash of inspiration, he proceeded forward in refining it. After having a few tentative plans, Klein walked to the balcony and looked at the garden in the night sky, whispering, "Can you inflict misfortune onto Kona's Kilgore before the battle?" After a brief silence, a calm and ordinary female voice rang in his ears. "Yes. Then it's fine on my side," Klein immediately replied. Tranquility quickly returned to his surroundings. A rather cold breeze blew by, and Klein expressionlessly stared at the manor for a few seconds. Then he pressed down on his silk hat, pulled the human-skinned glove on his left hand, and drew Death Knell from his underarm holster. Right on the heels of that, he flicked his thumb and made the iron-black revolver's cylinder spin. The night grew darker as the crimson moon occasionally tore through the clouds. Mager Manor was completely in a state of deep sleep. At this moment, a figure stealthily came from the Tussock River's south bank, taking 2 to 3 steps to return to his room. He was none other than the deputy director of MI9, Kona's Kilgore, who wore a white shirt and black trousers. This demigod with a stout look surveyed the area and didn't notice any abnormalities. He gradually revealed a smile and walked to the bar counter in the guest room. Getting a cup, he picked up a bottle of mager red wine. He prepared to pour some for himself to celebrate the wonderful night. At this moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he looked up abruptly. He saw the buildings with a few grayish-white chimneys suddenly become covered in shadows as if they were dyed with ink. To the side of the chimneys, on one of the steeple landmarks of Mager Manor's main building, it was equally dark. The bright red moon was silently hanging behind the chimney. The clouds and stars high in the sky had vanished. Apart from the gigantic crimson moon, there was pitch-black darkness. Under the night sky, the flowers and trees were clearly in front of him, but they lacked any signs of life. They were dim, as though they were a great distance away. Black and red, shadows and buildings, and the silence and plants presented themselves in front of Kona's Kilgore in such a strange state. The demigod's pupils dilated as he didn't hesitate to respond. He reached his left hand into his clothes and extended his right hand under his armpit, taking out 2 items. Amongst them, He held a strange revolver in his right palm. It was entirely gray in color, bigger than an ordinary revolver. It looked like it was half the size of a sledgehammer that was used in classical battles. Another unusual trait of the revolver was that it had 6 barrels, each rather thick. The mouth was dark, and its cylinder was embedded with more than 10 ugly rivets, making it have a rather crude beauty. Konas Kilgore's left hand held an iron-skinned pocket watch. On the watch's face, half of it was filled with neatly arranged symbols that followed the order of time, while the other half was a chaotic mess. It even intruded into the neighboring region. On both sides, it seemed impossible to see the machinery behind them as they formed into a structure that looked even more complex and headache-inducing. Almost at the same time, a figure emerged out of the gigantic crimson moon. It glided over at an extremely fast speed. He grew bigger and clearer. He was a young man with black hair, brown eyes, and cut features. The young man was wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. He held a unique revolver in one hand, and a transparent human-skinned glove covering the other. Under the bright illumination of the surroundings, he seemed to be burdened with the weight of the gigantic crimson moon. Gehrman Sparrow. Meow had an only slightly assisted fight against a sequence 4, where planning might go awry. I am looking forward to seeing how he will pull this off. Chapter 1026. 2 Restrictions. Upon seeing the young man in the black trench coat appear with a black revolver in hand, Konas Kilgore, who was no stranger to all the important figures in the world, immediately responded. The thumb on his left hand that held the iron-skinned pocket watch was rapidly moving, reaching for one of the metal buttons on the messy inlays of the pocket watch. He suddenly raised his right arm, aiming at Gehrman Sparrow with the 6 gray gun barrels that formed a circle. This process was like a fleeting spark that quickly came to an end. As for Konas Kilgore's left thumb, it had pressed down. He overcame his instinct and didn't directly use restriction from the Concerto of Light and Shadow. This was because he didn't know Gehrman Sparrow well enough, unsure as to what he was best at. Furthermore, the person with Gehrman Sparrow's appearance might not be Gehrman Sparrow. Blindly using restriction would only be a waste of an opportunity. He intended to observe and wait for a while longer before he came up with a more specific order to distort the laws. Bang! 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 The strange revolver let out a roar of despair and spewed out a storm of black and icy bullets, instantly enveloping the enemy beneath the crimson moon. At this moment, Gehrman Sparrow's figure turned transparent and incorporeal. At the same time, the bullets tore through the target in the black trench coat, tearing apart the afterimage he left behind. And behind Konas Kilgore, Gehrman Sparrow, with a cold expression, quickly appeared. His body was half-crouched, and he was leaning forward. The black top hat on his head appeared blood-red under the crimson moon's illumination. He suddenly raised the black-barreled revolver in his hand, opening his mouth slightly while aiming and squeezing the trigger. Bang! The floorboard to the right of Konas Kilgore exploded into countless fragments. Gehrman Sparrow's shot had been ridiculously far off the mark. Furthermore, its destructive power was clearly lacking. This was the distortion power of an Earl of the Fallen. It caused the bullet's trajectory to deviate and have its power weakened. Seizing this opportunity, Konas Kilgore used disorder to influence measurement standards, arriving above the balcony of the bedroom with one step. Then he half-turned his body, and with a smack, he pressed one of the metal buttons on his iron-skinned pocket watch. He then solemnly said, "Teleportation is prohibited here." Silently, Mager Manor, which was being illuminated by the gigantic crimson moon, experienced an unknown change. Gehrman Sparrow, whose body had rapidly turned faint after firing, appeared out of the void again. He had failed to successfully change positions. Concerto of Light and Shadow. Restriction. To Konas Kilgore, no matter what Gehrman Sparrow was good at, he had to immediately restrict his obvious ability to teleport. An enemy who could do close-quarters teleportation at a high frequency wasn't only irritating, but also dangerous. Realizing that his teleportation had failed, Gehrman Sparrow's expression remained unperturbed. His body quickly warped as the colors faded from his body, leaving a deep darkness. This deep darkness suddenly collapsed across the ground, fusing with the shadows in the region where the moonlight couldn't reach, making him indistinguishable. Bang! 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 Bullet holes riddled the spot where Gehrman Sparrow was previously standing, tearing the ground open. Boom! The area collapsed immediately, revealing the room before. However, no dust was thrown up. And despite such a stir, Mager Manor remained blanketed in deep shadows. No one was awakened or gave a response. Konas Kilgore suppressed the urge to restrict the action of hiding in the shadows. Holding on to Rever's shout of despair and concerto of light and shadow, he calmly observed his surroundings and waited for Gehrman Sparrow to appear once again before launching his attack. However, inside the collapsed room, the shadows were silent, and there wasn't any movement. And outside the window, the steeple and chimneys remained immersed in an icy cold darkness. The gigantic crimson moon seemed to be hanging over the roof. The plants in the garden, the grapevines far away, and all the various classical windows seemed to degenerate into the background on this night. Despite being visible to the naked eye, they were imperturbable. All of Mager Manor was cold, dark and silent, just like a forgotten corner that didn't garner the attention or incur discovery from others. There were no signs of life at all. As a demigod, as an important figure in the intelligence community, Konas Kilgore quickly had a theory. He suspected that the person was related to the authority of concealment. This gave him many ideas, but Gehrman Sparrow remained nowhere to be seen. He actually didn't sneak attack and even gave up the chance to deliver a barrage of attacks, leaving me so many openings. Doesn't he know that a high-sequence lawyer or arbiter is very difficult to deal with once they're prepared prior to the battle? A sense of puzzlement flashed across Konas Kilgore's mind. Using his observations of his surroundings and the relatively non-urgent situation, he quickly understood his current predicament. He knew that defeating Gehrman Sparrow wasn't key, but escaping the concealed world was. If he couldn't leave this place, there might be more dangers awaiting him. As long as I can leave this dark-styled Mager Manor, even if angels were to descend, I don't have to worry since I'm in Backland. Such artificial concealed worlds must have an opening. This is a law that cannot be avoided in the mysterious world. The usage and distortion of laws was what lawyer pathway demigods were best at. Konas Kilgore had many ideas come to him as he quickly made a decision. He suddenly turned around and jumped from the balcony, flying off like he was a spring that was released. This demigod of the military instantly reached a high altitude, but he didn't slow down or show any signs of falling. He maintained this speed as he went higher and higher in altitude, thus achieving flight. Earl of the Fallen. Exploit. This was the exploitation of laws. By extending the jumping process, he could maintain a much longer duration. If Konas Kilgore became a Sequence 2 angel, he could even jump onto the Crimson Moon with this beyonder power. While jumping in midair, Konas Kilgore swung his right arm and released his disorder beyonder power. He wanted to create a certain level of disorder in Mager Manor in this strange world. The true exit would then be exposed through the generated ripples. Instantly, the flowers and grapevines in the background of Mager Manor wavered. The black steeple, chimneys, and classical windows were covered in a faint shadow. In the entire world, only the gigantic crimson moon which appeared to be right before them didn't change. It continued hanging silently in the sky. That's the exit. Konas Kilgore grasped the patterns from the disorder, and using some actual feedback, he determined where the exit was. Without any hesitation, he exerted strength in his waist and used Magnify to forcefully change his direction, allowing him to rush towards the bright red moon. At that moment, a figure appeared in front of Mager Manor. It was none other than the cold-looking Gehrman Sparrow who wore a black trench coat and half-top hat. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind appeared out of nowhere, sweeping Gehrman Sparrow upwards as he chased after Konas Kilgore. Amidst the wind, he raised the iron-black revolver in his right hand and pulled the trigger. Bang! A bullet flew out, exploding into countless fragments. They then turned into a storm that swept towards Konas Kilgore. Death knell. Slaughter. It was a barrage of attacks. Almost at the same time, Konas Kilgore changed direction without any warning, plummeting instead of rushing towards the moon. As a result, he dodged the bullet storm's assault as though he was prepared for it. No, it wasn't the case. He was prepared. Although his main goal was to escape the changed Mager Manor, he was still worried that Gehrman Sparrow would seize the opportunity to attack him. Therefore, he came up with a simple trap, planning to use his escape as bait to fish out the hiding Gehrman Sparrow. He could then take the initiative to heavily injure his opponent. Halfway down, Konas Kilgore's figure suddenly bounced back, having distorted the direction he was heading in. This time, his destination was the next point, where Gehrman Sparrow was flying towards. Right on the heels of that, He yanked his pocket watch-wielding left hand back and grabbed Gairman Sparrow through thin air, pulling him from a distance of nearly 100 meters away to just inches before him. Earl of the Fallen. Magnify. Whoosh. Amidst the howling winds, Konas Kilgore grabbed Gairman Sparrow's clothes and pressed his strange revolver in his right hand forward. Bang, 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 bang. Rever's shout of despair released countless bullets like a machine gun, instantly tearing Gairman Sparrow's body into fluttering pieces of paper. Konas Kilgore's gaze froze slightly as he immediately moved his left finger and pressed one of the metal buttons on his pocket watch. With a click, this Earl of the Fallen didn't hesitate to say in a domineering fashion, "Stand-ins are prohibited here." Just as he said that, the howling wind came to a stop. Mager Manor returned to silence once again as it was blanketed by dark shadows. Konas Kilgore changed direction and began spiraling in midair in search of Gairman Sparrow. However, there weren't any anomalies in the dark night sky. This Earl of the Fallen hesitated for a moment before preparing to continue rushing towards the gigantic crimson moon. At this moment, figures appeared in the garden, vineyard, and manor's main building. They either grew or became taller, rapidly taking form. They all had black hair and brown eyes with sharp facial features. They wore silk top hats and black trench coats. They were all Gairman Sparrows. The only difference was that some of them were of normal build, some with their backs sunk inwards. The rest were bloated while others just a thin layer. Upon seeing this scene, Konas Kilgore immediately recalled a dangerous enemy he had once encountered. One of the leaders of Intis's intelligence department, a bizarro sorcerer. Chapter 1027 to say after Konas Kilgore realized which beyonder pathway his enemy belonged to, all the Gairman Sparrows in the garden, vineyard, and main building raised their left hand. They curled their middle finger, ring finger, and pinky, extending their index finger and thumb, making them take on the simple shape of a gun. The index fingers that represented barrels and muzzles aimed at Konas Kilgore in the air before their respective arms jerked up seemingly due to the recoil. Bang, 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 bang. Amidst deafening noises, illusory doves appeared to the side of the Earl of the Fallen, who was dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. They flew at him from every direction in a spectacular sight of utmost beauty. This was the random anomaly that came about from the iron-skinned pocket watch and concerto of light and shadow. It made the air cannons which could blast through houses turn into doves of peace that didn't pose any threat. Having used disorder to disrupt the enemy's collective volley, Konas Kilgore wasn't surprised to see the doves fly up and disperse into the air. He was already mentally prepared. He had already endured the negative effects that the sealed artifact had brought for years. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he didn't hesitate to raise his hands which held the iron-skinned pocket watch and revolver, doing so in a bid to make them collide. This was distortion, one that targeted all the Gairman Sparrows beneath him. To Konas Kilgore, what frustrated him the most when fighting a bizarro sorcerer was that he was unable to tell if the enemy he faced was a marionette or the actual person unless the marionette was of a very crude level. As such, he had many beyonder powers he didn't dare use because they were ineffective against marionettes. A large-scale prohibition effect was still all right, but a single target deprivation was meaningless in actual combat. No matter how many beyonder powers of a marionette were deprived, it didn't affect the actual body. When that happened, his opponent just needed to switch marionettes to resolve the problem. Due to similar reasons, using magnify on the mystical items on the marionettes was temporarily written off by Konas Kilgore for strategic purposes. Similarly, an Earl of the Fallen's bestowment was of no use. It was even inferior to deprivation, as it could cause a bizarro sorcerer's marionette to lose its corresponding beyonder powers. However, the negative effects bestowed to a marionette was unable to interfere with it at all. Be it turning them sluggish, losing the will to fight, making them turn anxious, or only focus on money, it was meaningless to a marionette who was, in essence, dead, without any ability to think or inclinations to take action. Therefore, Konas Kilgore decided to first resolve the problem of identifying marionettes and the actual body. In this aspect, others might not have a solution, but a high-sequence beyonder of the lawyer pathway definitely didn't have such worries. There were rules to everything, and everything followed certain rules. As a lawyer demigod, they were good at finding whatever loopholes there were to exploit them for themselves. Together with his combat experience fighting other bizarro sorcerers, and how he had seriously considered solutions for dealing with them during the aftermath, Konas Kilgore was quite certain that distortion could suppress his enemy. He knew that bizarro sorcerers could seamlessly switch between their actual body and marionettes. He planned on distorting this, making the bizarro sorcerer only be able to switch to 2 to 3 marionettes. This way, the difficulty of identifying the actual body and the marionette would be minimized. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that distortion couldn't exceed certain limits, and area-oriented prohibition effects had reached its limit, Konas Kilgore definitely would have used a simpler method to deal with his opponent, such as forcing the bizarro sorcerer to only be able to swap with one marionette, or he would prohibit swapping with marionettes. Pah! Konas Kilgore smashed the Rever Shout of Despair and Concerto of Light and Shadow together, as though he was compressing a large area to a small area. Earl of the Fallen. Distortion. Silently, he produced a red glow with a deep shadow in his hand. It appeared as though he was offering it to the Gairman sparrows in the garden, vineyard, and main building. As for the thick and thin, normal, or terrifying crazy adventurers, none of them experienced any abnormalities. Konas Kilgore also suffered a random anomaly, one brought about by Concerto of Light and Shadow. It had changed the distortion effects to summoning a flower from the garden below. And at that moment, the air cannons that had turned into illusory doves continued. At that moment, the battle between two demigods turned ludicrous, comical, and funny. Of course, be it Gairman Sparrow or Konas Kilgore, none of them thought that was the case, especially the latter. He once again felt a familiar sense of helplessness. He didn't hesitate as he slammed his palms together again, completing the distortion. He wanted to rely on quantity to resist the random anomaly effect. However, Gairman Sparrow wasn't a dead person who would abide by the etiquette of turn-based combat. The large swath of crazy adventurers either raised their hands in firing stances or used a death knell with questionable authenticity, aiming at the Earl of the Fallen in midair. Meanwhile, Konas Kilgore's heart stirred. He turned his head slightly to look up and saw that a figure had appeared once again inside the gigantic crimson moon that hung above the black steeple. The figure was wearing a silk top hat, a black trench coat, a human-skinned glove, and an iron-black revolver. He had a cold expression and a deep outline. He was another Gairman Sparrow. The crimson moon seemed to weigh down on his shoulders as he glided down, his body expanding and turning clearer in the process. As for the iron-black long-barreled revolver in his hand, he had already lifted it and aimed it at Konas Kilgore. Bang! Bang! A bullet that had transparent and translucent sections to it shot out from the muzzle, heading straight for Konas Kilgore. This was a deprivation bullet, one which was created using a worm of time that Amon's avatar had left behind. It was different from an Arbiter Pathways deprivation. In essence, it was theft. It could steal the last 3 Beyonder powers the target had used and become empowered with the ability to use them. However, as long as the Arbiter Pathways deprivation selected a target, then they could directly deprive them of their ability. Although this bullet's deprivation effect didn't require contact in order to be effective, the target needed to be within a certain range and unable to leave the area. In short, one was unavoidable and could only be resisted or weakened through one's level or sequence's characteristics, while the other could effectively be dodged if the shot was detected ahead of time. Klein had given up on a sneak attack and had stalled for time because, on the one hand, he wanted Konas Kilgore to use up all his prohibition and deprivation powers on Beyonder powers that appeared important to him. On the other hand, he was also waiting for the first random anomaly to happen. Then, he would seize the gap in between the two anomalies to steal Konas Kilgore's 3 most powerful powers with the deprivation bullet. For these 2 goals, he even handed Death Knell and Creeping Hunger to winner Anuni and made him appear like the real Gairman Sparrow instead of a marionette. From the current developments, Konas Kilgore was about to lose distortion, disorder, and magnify. Bang! 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 The Gairman Sparrows underneath collectively fired shots. Suddenly, the air cannons and the deprivation bullet exploded, turning into red, purple, yellow, or green fireworks. However, they were unable to illuminate the deep dark sky. Concerto of Light and Shadow had once again created a random anomaly. It had produced its effects several times in a row without any pauses or delays. Konas Kilgore immediately smiled and slammed his hands together again. All of a sudden, the young men wearing silk top hats and black trench coats under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination turned gloomy. Only 2 maintained their previous states. The Earl of the Fallen's distortion had taken effect. This meant that Gairman Sparrow could only switch places with those 2 normal marionettes. Right on the heels of that, Kona's Kilgore didn't hesitate at all. He swung his arm and threw out the flower that was held together with the pocket watch out. The flower sped up and seemed to gain weight of unknown origins. Like an arrow, it shot towards one of the normal marionettes. This attack had been magnified, and also came with the effects of bribe, weaken. Boom! The flower was like a cannon that crashed heavily into the ground, causing a violent quake. The surging waves it stirred up threw up the ordinary and unordinary humans in the vicinity, tearing or severely injuring them. The two marionettes which Gehrman Sparrow could swap with had been reduced to pieces of meat. Kona's Kilgore maintained his calm. As he distorted his trajectory in midair and circled the area while in flight, he raised Rever's shout of despair and aimed it at the Gehrman Sparrow that had descended from the crimson moon. At the same time, he silently prepared a bestowment. He wanted to give his target the negative state of lacking the will to fight. But at that moment, Kona's Kilgore's mind suddenly turned adrift as his thoughts turned sluggish. This. Turning into a marionette. Kona's Kilgore's mental state stiffened as he understood his current situation. He then saw that Gehrman Sparrow, who had descended from the crimson moon, wasn't as far away from him as before. The distance between them was only about 100 meters. He had unknowingly entered the range where spirit body threads could be controlled. He had stayed there for at least 3 seconds without realizing it. Deceit. A deceit bullet made from Amon's avatar. When Klein, who was actually Winner Anuni, had pulled the trigger, he hadn't only fired a deprivation bullet, but had actually fired twice. This was to prevent any random anomalies from happening. With an anomaly having happened once, even if another anomaly were to happen, only one of the 2 bullets that had been fired in intervals that were slightly spaced apart would be affected. After all, it was an intermittent random anomaly. It was possible to have it happen 2 to 3 times consecutively, but 4 or 5 consecutive occurrences were rare. Therefore, by attacking numerous times, there would be at least 1 or more instances that wouldn't suffer an anomaly. Just now, the firing of the second deceit bullet had been concealed by the collective volley from the marionettes. This was also why Klein made Winner Anuni use Death Knell. It was to rely on his luck. Finally, he successfully deceived Kona's Kilgore and allowed Winner Anuni to secretly enter a safe distance of 150 meters from him and begin controlling his spirit body threads and obtained initial control. The moment this began, it meant that the Beyonder power was taking effect. Since there weren't any anomalies, it meant that there wouldn't be any more. 1028 Saving himself no good. My spirit body threads have been controlled by him. Having met faceless Beyonders, marionettists, or bizarro sorcerers, and even fighting senior Beyonders and demigods, Kona's Kilgore wasn't unfamiliar with the predicament he was in. He was even rather familiar with it and knew quite a bit. Therefore, he knew very well that he had fallen into a lethal trap. The time he had left to save himself didn't exceed 15 seconds. And in these 15 seconds, his thoughts would turn more and more sluggish, and the speed at which he could come up with solutions would slow down. Towards the end, just the thought of a solution would take him several seconds. Yet, his stiff and dull body would require plenty of time to actualize his thoughts. This also meant that he had about 10 seconds to save himself. Of course, he had considered the corresponding response for the last few seconds. It was to abandon his body's control and reveal his mythical creature form. Through this, he could delay the time it took to become a marionette and then use his existence to disrupt the enemy, dealing a blow to them to a certain extent. However, by doing so, even if he escaped the fate of becoming a marionette and even managed to defeat his enemy, Kona's Kilgore didn't have much confidence in continuing to live. He wasn't a demigod who could freely switch between his human form and mythical creature form. He didn't have the confidence that he could maintain his rationale in a mythical creature form. In other words, the outcome of escaping the fate of becoming a marionette by releasing his mythical creature form likely meant that the human, Kona's Kilgore, would die, while a monster of the same name would occupy his body. Because of that outcome, Kona's Kilgore wouldn't make such an attempt unless it was necessary. While his thoughts weren't too sluggish, and with how he could hear Rever's shout of despair in his ears, this demigod of the military quickly came up with his first plan to save himself. He moved his right thumb at a speed that couldn't be considered slow. Earl of the Fallen. Magnify. Kona's Kilgore didn't wish to magnify a particular state of his or the attack of a particular sealed artifact. Instead, it was used to magnify Rever's shout of despair side effects. This special revolver allowed the wielder to hear the roar of despair from time to time, a rather serious blow to creatures without godhood, easily pushing them to the brink of losing control, to madness, to a mental breakdown or mind blanking. And at sequence 4, the effects of the roar was greatly mitigated once his body possessed the characteristics of a mythical creature. To Kona's Kilgore, this roar was enough to turn his mind adrift and generate irascible mood swings. It didn't have much of an effect on him, and he had already gotten used to it. And at that moment, he wanted to magnify the roar of despair to a state where even a demigod wouldn't be able to tolerate it. He wanted to use the pain that came from the psychic piercing in his mind to escape the state of having his spirit body threads being controlled. As magnify didn't need any obvious actions, it was quick to show its effects. Opposite him, Gairman Sparrow, who held Death Knell and wore a half-top hat, was floating in midair with strong gusts of wind swirling around him. He didn't make it in time to stop the Earl of the Fallen from successfully using this beyonder power. But in the next second, what Kona's Kilgore met in response wasn't a terrifying roar but silence. The ordinary roar that was originally present had vanished. This was a random anomaly brought about by the concerto of light and shadow. Seriously? How unlucky! Kona's Kilgore's thoughts slowly flashed past his mind. He didn't have the luxury of time to feel disheartened as he immediately made a second attempt. He raised his right hand in an unsteady manner, aiming Rever's shout of despair at Gairman Sparrow, who stood 150 meters from him and was about to pull the trigger. At the same moment, the strong winds that blew at his right hand suddenly disintegrated in an inward fashion, turning into scattered eddies. Earl of the Fallen. Disorder. Konas had used this to withstand Gairman Sparrow's interference. Following that, there was a series of thumping sounds. Like a machine gun, Rever's shout of despair spewed out dangerous bullets without stopping. Gairman Sparrow's black trenchcoat-covered body jerked repeatedly, but he wasn't hit. The bullets grazed his outline and flew into the distance, shattering the windows and walls, causing one of the buildings to collapse in silence. Bang! 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 The subsequent bullet storm continued their barrage, and finally, Gairman Sparrow was struck repeatedly. Amidst splattering blood, Gairman Sparrow kept struggling and shaking in the strong gust of winds like a paper figurine, looking as though he was about to tear apart at any moment. Bang! 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 The strange revolver finally stopped its roar. And apart from his head, Gairman Sparrow was riddled with nasty gaping holes. Typically speaking, this was definitely a state that only the dead had. However, Gairman Sparrow continued controlling the spirit body threads as though he was unaffected. The ridiculous wounds on his body slowly but resolutely healed. This was the effect of Flower of Blood. This Gairman Sparrow was actually a Noonie. The reason why he didn't die in that storm-like attack was because he had released all his accumulated luck. It was also because Kona's Kilgore was sufficiently unlucky. And the roar of despair that the bullets brought forth was nothing to a marionette. Seeing that the violent attack failed to achieve the desired effect and that the amount of time he had left to save himself dwindled, Kona's Kilgore followed his thought-out plan and slowly relaxed his 5 left fingers without any thought. The iron-skinned pocket watch left his palm and dropped to the ground. At such a critical moment, Kona's Kilgore decisively gave up the concerto of light and shadow, and made it stay far away from the battlefield so as to avoid the effects of its random anomalies. Next, he might only have 1 or 2 chances to save himself. If another anomaly were to happen, the outcome was irreversible. The sealed artifact, which was a mixture of half-order and disorder, quickly plummeted to the ground. Kona's Kilgore moved his fingers with great difficulty as he faced Gairman Sparrow, whose wounds were quickly healing. He originally had 2 choices. One was to use the third method he had originally thought of to save himself, an action that only required a mere thought. The other was to magnify his enemy's injuries and make him die on the spot. However, when Kona's Kilgore was still able to think relatively quickly, he didn't expect Gairman Sparrow to not die after suffering so many gunshots. Even his control over the spirit body threads wasn't affected. There was no subsequent follow-up to this plan. And at this moment, his brain was already like a sluggish mush. He had no way of thinking too much. He didn't wish to waste any more time as he followed his plans. Whoosh! Around Gairman Sparrow, who wore a transparent glove and iron-black revolver, the strong gusts of winds that held him up suddenly intensified and sent him flying up high. Whoosh! With the help of the strong winds, Gairman Sparrow raced to the pitch-black sky under the watch of the gigantic crimson moon. Earl of the Fallen. Magnify. The strong winds that helped Gehrman's sparrow fly had been magnified into a hurricane. This way, the distance between him and Kona's Kilgore would stretch beyond 150 meters. That would terminate the process of turning the latter into a marionette. Seeing his goal achieved, Kona's Kilgore, who had yet to regain his freedom, had his expression turn complicated bit by bit. The hurricane rapidly expanded and swept over to him, engulfing him and throwing him high into the sky. It made it impossible for the distance between him and Gehrman's sparrow to open up. He was truly unlucky. Under the night sky, amidst the moonlight, the two figures became smaller. Soon, the hurricane returned to normal as their momentum slowly diminished. Seizing this opportunity, Kona's Kilgore's nearly frozen mind had another idea. Stop! He stopped maintaining his power of flight and used gravity to plummet down like a meteor, doing so in order to rapidly open up a distance from Gehrman's sparrow. Then, he ignored Gehrman's sparrow's ability to control the wind and pursue him. He slowly pulled his left arm in front of his body like it was filled with rust. It was the action of closing a door. He wanted to use an Earl of the Fallen's distortion to create a wall-like seal in the air, putting an obstacle between Gehrman's sparrow and him, so that he couldn't carry out his pursuit. At that moment, the marionettes, the Gehrman sparrows who were still alive underneath him, raised their left arms and made the gesture of firing a gun. Bang! 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 Bullets shot out, enveloping Kona's Kilgore in midair. After the shock waves dispersed, Kona's Kilgore was covered with several bloody holes. Due to the pain and the jolting of his body from the first few bullets striking him, he had finally snapped out of the state of having his spirit body threads being controlled. The speed of his thoughts rapidly recovered. Following that, he disordered the subsequent volley at the critical moment and distorted his injuries, preventing himself from dying. All he suffered were serious injuries. And Gehrman's sparrow, who had many mystical items and was swooping down from above, he was obstructed by the invisible wall. He failed to catch up. With another distortion, Kona's Kilgore's descent speed slowed down as he gently landed on the ground. Before he could do anything else, his body froze again as he stood stiffly on the spot. He felt that his hands and feet were resisting him and not listening to his commands. He felt that there was an unfamiliar object hiding in his body. Then, he saw a figure walk out of Mager Manor's master bedroom under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination and stand on the balcony. He had black hair and brown eyes, wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. His facial features were pronounced, and he was another Gehrman sparrow. This Gehrman sparrow's right hand had the gesture of firing a gun. He then pulled back his hand and blew at it. That was Klein himself. What he shot out wasn't an air bullet but a parasite bullet delivered with an air bullet's might. It was a parasite bullet created from a worm of time that Amon's avatar had left behind. It could create a worm of time that couldn't live too long, allowing it to parasitize the target and be controlled by the user. Klein had deliberately taken out the bullet and held it in his hand, specifically to wait for this opportunity. He was waiting for Kona's Kilgore to throw away Concerto of Light and Shadow, and not have the ability to dodge or use distortion. The former was predictable when the Earl of the Fallen's spirit body threads reached the state of initially being control. This was because he couldn't allow the random anomalies to influence his attempts to save himself, and the latter was all about patience. Just moments ago, his patience had paid off. A chance appeared. Klein was the first to raise his hand and shoot. Without the random anomalies affecting the outcome, he had accurately shot a parasite bullet into Kona's Kilgore's body. If the thing that had previously taken effect wasn't a deceit bullet but a deprivation bullet, then the strategy would be different. Briefly unable to control his body, Kona's Kilgore looked at the Gehrman sparrow on the balcony remove his top hat, press his hand to his chest, and bow slightly at him under the gigantic crimson moon. As Gehrman sparrow's trench coat fluttered, his thoughts had turned sluggish. Chapter 1029 Ruins Number 1 No. Kona's Kilgore stood on the spot as a strong feeling of despair emerged in his heart. As a military demigod who had experienced many dangers, he had a clear understanding of his current situation. He could already hear the footsteps of death approaching him. He wanted to struggle and risk it by revealing his mythical creature form, but his orders didn't do a thing with his sluggish mind. His body had been parasitized, and was no longer under his control. At that moment, Kona's Kilgore wasn't even capable of shedding a tear. under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination. 1 second after another passed. Suddenly, Konas Kilgore raised his left hand and touched his crew haircut. He had already become Klein's marionette. In fact, he still had a chance at the final moment. As the parasite effect didn't last long enough for him to become a marionette, he had those 2 or 3 seconds to reveal his mythical creature form. But the problem was that his body also had the effects of misdirection and deceit. As time passed, his thoughts turned more and more sluggish and wasn't able to grasp that short opportunity. Klein looked at his new marionette and exhaled silently. He looked up at the clear and bright red moon and said, "It's done." Amidst the gigantic crimson moon, a black dot instantly appeared and descended from the sky. It was none other than the Church of Evemite's Archbishop, servant of concealment, Ariana, who wore a simple robe with tree bark as a belt. In this concealed world, this ascetic didn't use any beyonder powers to float in midair. She cast her eyes at the Earl of the Fallen beneath. She gently raised her right hand as Konas Kilgore's slightly blurry soul emerged from the military demigod's head. Klein lost his control over his marionette as a result of this. He wasn't too surprised by this because he hadn't sent a worm of spirit through the spirit body threads over. His control over the marionette was essentially still at a sequence 5 state and not at the demigod level. "Where did you go just now?" Ariana asked calmly as she looked at Konas Kilgore's soul. Konas Kilgore's expression twisted slightly before replying. "Ruins number 1. Is this a contractual promise or a psychological cue?" Klein, who watched the spirit channeling from the side, sensed something from the Earl of the Fallen's reaction. However, this didn't affect anything because they were in a concealed world, one which no one knew of or could sense. "Where is that ruin? Who did it once belong to? What is it being used for?" As an archbishop of the Evernight goddess and an angel of the corresponding pathway, Ariana shared a certain amount of authority in concealment. Therefore, she didn't start with the simplest questions but went straight to the point. She wasn't afraid of any accidents. Konas Kilgore's soul trembled slightly as he exuded a feeling as if he would automatically blow up, but ultimately, nothing happened. He hesitantly replied, "That ruin is located deep underground at the Sturlwind segment of the Tussock River. It has a setup that interferes with the powers of divination and prophecy." Sturlwind segment. This is quite far from the mountain where Mr. A was at and where you disappeared from. From the looks of it, you were very cautious. That point-to-point teleports effects are greater than I expected. Klein quickly conjured a picture of the terrain of Backlund's northwestern outskirts. Konas Kilgore continued replying, "That ruin used to belong to Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. I'm not sure what it's currently used for. I'm unable to enter the depths of the ruins and am only in charge of sending in people and materials acquired via various means." The name Blood Emperor Alista Tudor made Ariana fall silent. About 3 seconds later, she asked, "What materials did you acquire?" This time, Konas Kilgore didn't put up much of a resistance. He listed them down, including large amounts of mercury, iron ore, and ritual materials of different domains. Klein was unable to obtain any effective information from that because it was too well-rounded. It was possible to do anything. They really are very careful, using large amounts of sundries to hide what they're truly searching for. Even the demigod in charge of these matters isn't aware of the reason. This is very in line with the way a spectator pathway beyonder works. It was designed by the psychology alchemists? Klein nodded indiscernibly with a guess in mind. Ariana didn't seem to notice anything as she asked, "Do you have any guesses on what they're doing? If so, what?" "Yes, I suspect that they're digging up something and attempting to make sacrifices," Konas Kilgore voiced out his judgment. Ariana silently looked down at him for a while and said, "Who got you involved in the underground ruins? Who are the people who can enter the depths of the ruins?" Konas Kilgore struggled once again, but there were no anomalies. He said hesitantly, "I received His Majesty's orders. I was able to become a demigod because he provided me with the formulas, ingredients, and the opportunity. He even bestowed me with a concerto of light and shadow, allowing me to act as a sequence 5 beyonder even in situations where I can't hide my strength. Apart from His Majesty entering the depths of the ruins, only 2 other demigods of the royal family can enter. One of them is Prince Grove, and the other is Duchess Georgina. They both have Augustus as their last names. But the royal family doesn't only have 2 demigods. Miss Justice doesn't know much of these 2 and mentioned that they seldom participate in social events. Even their seats as House of Lords Member of Parliaments are given to their children. Yes, at the demigod level, even if they lack the beyonder characteristics of not dying and not aging, it wouldn't be a problem living for more than 100 years. It's really not suitable for them to hold official posts and repeatedly appear in public. Klein tried hard to recall, but he failed to gather anything else. Ariana was silent for a few seconds before suddenly asking, "Have you met Corrins in the underground ruins?" "Who is he?" Konas Kilgore asked in confusion. Ariana didn't answer and continued asking, "Besides them, who else have you met in the underground ruins?" Konas Kilgore maintained his sluggish state, which was characteristic of spirit channeling. People from the Demonist sect and psychology alchemists. The former was originally represented by Despair Nightingale Panatia, but was changed to Saintess of White Katarina. The latter is Vin Rambus. Did they enter the depths of the underground ruins? Ariana asked meticulously. "I don't know. I wasn't following them all the time." Konas Kilgore shook his head. "At least when I met them, they were all in the periphery." Ariana asked other questions in an attempt to draw out the general outline of the matter via other angles. However, it was obvious that George Ill's arrangements were flawless. Even a demigod like Konas Kilgore only knew about the mission that he was responsible for and could only move about in designated regions. He was unable to learn more. After some thought, Ariana flipped up her right hand and gently pressed down, pushing Konas Kilgore's soul back into his body. Klein's control over his marionette was restored. This made Klein sigh inwardly. The authority of concealment is really impressive. Even if Ma'am Ariana were to question my marionette one day, I wouldn't even know. At this moment, Ariana turned her body and spoke to the Gairman Sparrow on the balcony. "A problem with George III has basically been confirmed, as well as where the underground ruins are. I will immediately meet with the archbishops of the Church of Storms and Church of Steam, convincing them to take action tonight and opening the ruins. Before I inform you, control Konas Kilgore and pretend that everything is fine before making him vanish." "Are you worried that the enemy will notice a problem with Konas Kilgore while negotiating with the Church of Storms and Church of Steam, making it so that they can seal off the underground ruins or activate other emergency plans?" Klein had a general understanding of the matter and nodded. "No problem." Ariana, who didn't have adorned hair, didn't speak further. With a casual wave of her hand, the iron-skinned pocket watch flew over. This sealed artifact was bestowed by George III. Perhaps we might be able to find some clues from its origins. "Does that mean you're taking it away?" Klein replied without any objection. "I'll leave it to you." He really didn't have any complaints about that, and he even believed that it was only right. After all, half of the battle's success was due to Ariana's contribution with the concealed world and blessing him with misfortune. In the event that she didn't take the Concerto of Light and Shadow, Klein would mention it. When it came to matters like this, he was always just. And the Concerto of Light and Shadow was the spoils of war that he didn't want the most. This was because it was at complete odds with his combat style as a bizarro sorcerer. The random anomalies would affect him, and the weakening effect was something worse than the enemy. If Klein's spoils of war from this matter was the pocket watch, then he had considered tricking. No, promoting it to the Snake of Fate Willow Septon. Only a life school of thought demigod who relied on luck to survive could commandeer the Concerto of Light and Shadow. And when that happens, with such a huge secret organization in a sequence one, they definitely had powerful sealed artifacts that could be used to trade for it. Upon receiving his reply, Ariana gently nodded. She then threw the iron-skinned pocket watch back at Konas Kilgore, making the Earl of the Fallen look no different from before. Her figure vanished as though it had been erased by an eraser. Even the pitch-black world with the gigantic crimson moon hanging in the sky, the steeple, and chimneys were quickly wiped away. In the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Klein was inside the master bedroom, and Konas Kilgore was in a guest room tens of meters away. Clenched tightly in his hand was Rever's shout of despair. Then, this Brigadier General of MI9 used disorder to place the revolver back into his underarm holster and pick up the mager wine he had previously poured out and took a sip. Chapter 1030 Joint Operations Backlund, Northborough, St. Samuel Cathedral. The Cardinal of the Church of Storms, Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, deep blue officiant Randall Valentinus descended amidst the wind, landing inside the steeple with a huge clock to the left. He donned a black robe with the storm symbol and had thick facial hair. His hair was short and stood up, colored in a dark blue that was almost black. This muscular demigod cast his gaze to the other side and said to the figure who was already waiting there, "Horimic, do you know what happened? Why did Anthony suddenly invite us over here?" The person he spoke to was dressed in a white priest robe and a clergyman's bonnet. He had a genial and mild expression, and he was none other than the Church of Steam's Divine Council member, Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, the demigod Horimic Haydn. Upon hearing Randall's question, Horimic calmly replied, "I didn't arrive here much earlier than you. In fact, I only left the laboratory for a few minutes." He wasn't only a clergyman but also a famous scientist. He was an emeritus professor at Backlund University's physics department. Randall Valentinus was just about to say something when he suddenly saw a figure walk up the narrow spiral staircase and arrive at the peak in the darkness that the crimson moon wasn't able to illuminate. This figure was dressed in a black clergyman robe with red accents. By his chest hung 5 dark sacred emblems. He was clean-shaven, and his eyes were deep, dark and tranquil. He was none other than one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of Evernight, Backlund Diocese's person in charge, St. Anthony Stevenson. Is there something that can't wait until daybreak? Or do people from the Church of Evernight enjoy discussing matters at night? Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus asked. Anthony came to a stop after walking up the flight of stairs and said with a serious expression, "A very pressing matter." "What is it?" Randall asked immediately. At this moment, Horimic Haydn also cast his gaze at Anthony Stevenson, awaiting his answer. In similar situations, Horimic especially liked the existence of people from the Church of Storms. This meant that they would take the initiative to ask questions and that there was no need to be euphemistic. It didn't require him to say anything else. Anthony looked at them separately and said, "It's related to the royal family. I'll let Ma'am Ariana do the honors." Just as he said that, a barefoot, bun-haired female figure in a simple robe with tree bark for a belt quickly outlined itself out of the shadows. Upon seeing this figure, Randall and Horimic immediately bowed. "Good evening, Ma'am Ariana." Their expressions turned solemn at the same time, for they had a deep understanding of how important and crucial the matter that was happening tonight was. It was definitely not a small matter for a grounded angel to appear. Meanwhile, they couldn't help but be roused up. They realized that they had no idea when this matron of the Evernight cloister, the servant of concealment, Ma'am Ariana, had arrived in Backlund. Under normal circumstances, the 3 churches, the royal family, and the military enjoyed a certain degree of tacit cooperation. Grounded angels and Grade O sealed artifacts wouldn't appear in Backlund. "Good evening, archbishops," Ariana answered without any signs of haughtiness. She then raised her right hand and grasped onto thin air. A faint light was emitted as it transformed into a scene along with the darkness. It was the entire conversation between Ariana and Konas Kilgore. This secret that appeared to have been kept for quite some time had finally presented itself before others. As they watched, Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus couldn't help but say, he actually advanced to sequence 4 and became a demigod. This archbishop knew Konas Kilgore. He originally believed that this deputy director of MI9 was only a sequence 5 and had relied on a sealed artifact with severe negative effects to obtain combat strength at the demigod level. He never expected it to be a disguise. The Church of Storm's influence on the military was greater than the 2 major churches. No one answered Randall. After the secret was fully revealed, Horimic said, "One involves a secret ruin of the Blood Emperor, and with large numbers of people sent in. These 2 points put together cannot be anything good." "Indeed." Randall nodded in agreement. "Let's head to the ruins now." Ariana looked around and calmly said, "This involves the royal family and the king. It's best if you seek permission from your own Holy See." In this angel's choice of words, the Holy See referred to their respective churches' headquarters, the core seat of power of the church. "All right," the 2 archbishops replied without any hesitation. After a while, Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus and Horimic Haydn received feedback from the sealed artifacts they carried. Together with Anthony Stevenson and Ariana, they headed for the Blood Emperor ruins that Konas Kilgore had previously entered. Ariana then took out an iron-black coat of arms with complicated symbols, and she tried to activate it. She didn't make any disguise attempt, and she stood there calmly as though she wasn't worried that the guards in the ruins would recognize her. Seeing this servant of concealment's actions, Horimic seemed to be in thought. Randall wore a look of calm and didn't believe that it posed any problems. In the underground ruins, on a strange metal pedestal, a ghostly blue beam soared up and formed a door. 4 black armored guards immediately observed the situation outside through the ghostly blue beam, and planned on using a predetermined method to confirm if the person who had summoned the door of teleportation was disguised, so as to decide whether the door was to be opened. However, they didn't see anything. The area outside was empty. Just as they felt intense unease and confusion, a figure quickly outlined itself behind them. It was none other than the leader of the Church of Evernight Ascetics, Ariana, who wore a patched robe. In the blink of an eye, the 4 guards fell into a deep sleep. Anthony, Randall, and Horimic entered the underground ruins one after another. They didn't directly follow the path down. Instead, they passed through the hall, floating in midair as they overlooked everything. This was a world ruled by darkness. Small amounts of light came from the strange moss growing in different spots, as well as the flaming torches that came from the human-sized buildings. With their illuminating light, even beyonders without night vision could grasp the overall appearance of the huge ruin. On one side was a gray rock wall. It extended upwards without an end, and it seemed to be connected to the ground. On the other side, there was a bottomless dark valley as if it were the abyss where devils lived. A road paved with stone slabs lay in the middle connecting the halls and buildings together. From time to time, humans would come and go in silence. The archbishops of the 3 churches were just about to capture a few people who could enter the ruins to interrogate them about the situation inside when a figure flew out of the dark valley, heading straight for the demigods. The figure had a long face and wore a white hairnet. 2 curly mustaches grew above his lips, and he had thick brows. His eyes were slightly bigger and looked rather similar to a certain poker card figure. He wore a gown and had a huge cloak over him. The tips of his shoes were extremely long, and his attire was unlike the current times. It was as though he lived 100 years ago. Archbishops, like Anthony and Horimic, were no stranger to him. He knew that he was Prince of Sonia, Grove Augustus, one of the demigods of the royal family. "How did you enter?" Grove asked first, his expression a little surprised and uncertain. They looked at each other, and Anthony took the initiative to say, "We've always been investigating the large number of mysterious disappearances, and we had locked onto MI9's Kona's Kilgore. Through him, we found this place." Grove's expression changed slightly as he looked at the woman who left one's heart feeling tranquil. He deliberated and asked, "Ma'am Ariana?" "Yes, I was in charge of the disappearance case," Ariana answered succinctly. Prince Grove smiled bitterly. "We were too greedy. After discovering this ruin, we only thought of digging and retrieving the items inside." Chapter 1031 Possibility. As the sky lit up, the manors along the Tussock River's north bank began to wake up amidst the morning mist. The tall and portly from his cage came to the guest room where Kona's Kilgore slept last night. He knocked on the door and prepared to have breakfast with this MI9 deputy director. However, there was no response. "Has the Brigadier General headed for the dining room?" From his cage turned around in puzzlement and left the first floor. After breakfast was over, everyone realized that Kona's Kilgore had vanished. Under Dwayne Dantes' lead, they headed outside the guest room and watched the land steward, Richardson, open the door with his key. There was no one inside. "Does Brigadier General Kilgore have a hobby of taking morning strolls?" Mocht asked curiously as he pinched the 2 ends of his cheekbones. From his cage shook his head without hesitation. "No." "Did you hear anything last night?" The Chancellor of the Backland University of Technology, Portland Moment, surveyed the area and asked. Mocht recalled for a moment. "No, it was very quiet. Perfect for a vacation." Beside him, Hazel looked into the room curiously, but she couldn't think of any possibilities. At this moment, from his cage raised his theory. Brigadier General Kilgore is an important member of the military, and he often needs to handle unexpected matters. Perhaps he had long left the manor and returned to Backland. This steam car tycoon was clearly trying his best to downplay the matter. He seems to know something. Or at least, he guessed that Kona's Kilgore came to Mager Manor for some private, personal goal. Klein listened to their conversation as he said to Butler Walter and Land Steward Richardson with a heavy look. "Ask the servants in the manor if they had seen Brigadier General Kilgore last night or this morning. If they haven't, send someone back to Backland and visit Brigadier General Kilgore's family. Inform them of this matter and let them decide whether we need to immediately make a police report." After giving his instructions, Klein stroked his white sideburns and said to Mocked and his other guests, "Things aren't clear yet. Perhaps Brigadier General Kilgore left because of an urgent matter and didn't want to hold up everyone's vacation. Let's do this. We'll continue with our hunting plans and return when the police arrive." As Brigadier General Konas Kilgore's companion, from his cage had raised an excuse for the crisis, one that was rather convincing. Mocked and company agreed with Dwayne Dantes' suggestion and left the area. Hazel walked right at the back and glanced at Brigadier General Konas Kilgore's guest room and its neighboring room. She had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right as she subconsciously wanted to use her powers as a cryptologist to reconstruct the situation. However, an intense sense of fear emerged deep in her heart. She had no idea what she was afraid of, so she eventually gave up on the idea. She vaguely felt that she had some experience in such matters, and those experiences told her not to look at things she shouldn't see or listen to things she shouldn't hear. After the guests and servants left that floor, a thick carpet that held the weight of the coffee table inside the room beside Konas's guest room began moving. Bit by bit, it pulled itself up from under the sofa and coffee table without causing much of a stir. Following that, the yellowish-brown carpet stood up and revealed its other side. It was solidified flesh. The flesh was squirming and reorganizing itself, and it soon transformed into a person, a mixed-blood young man. This was Dwayne Dantes' valet, Anuni. And the one following Dwayne Dantes was Konas Kilgore. He wore the same face and had the same build. To Klein, there was no need to disguise Anuni in such a manner. He could get him to transform himself into another person and blend in with the servants, using an illusion to interfere with their senses, making them unable to discover the addition of this person. It was a simpler and more reliable method. However, acting remained important to a demigod. It was key to accelerating the potion's digestion, and for resisting the inclinations of losing control and madness. Therefore, Klein would deliberately try to be bizarre in his handling of many matters. Of course, he didn't wish to harm the innocent. Even in creating bizarre and eerie situations, he would try hard not to let others notice it. It was to prevent them from being left with a mental scar due to excessive fright. The bizarre and eerie atmosphere was mainly for himself, to gain the approval of the potion inside him. This would undoubtedly accelerate the digestion rate of his potion, but without the feedback of a spectator, it meant that the acting wasn't complete enough. This made the speed at which he digested the Bizarro Sorcerer potion not as fast as he imagined. Despite doing so many things and trying out so many acts, Klein didn't feel that it was possible for him to reach Sequence 3 by the end of this year. Backland East Borough. Inside a 2-bedroom rental apartment. Zio sat on an unstable chair as she stared out of the window in a daze, her expression a little gloomy. Fur swallowed her saliva and sat opposite Zio, blocking her line of sight. "You seem to have lost all your motivation? Do you not know what to do after receiving that answer? It's because you have no access to the king?" Zio's eyes fluttered as she slowly came to her senses. "Whether it's to redeem my father's reputation or revenge, the chances are slim when facing the king. I can't think of a way to complete something like that. That's because you're too weak. When you reach Sequence 4 and become a demigod, you'll discover many solutions. The only problem is that it'll be more dangerous." Furs tried encouraging her. "In addition, you can still use others. Just like the person monitoring Charmaine. She too wanted to know who Viscount Stratford was loyal to. She must be interested in the king's secret." "Charmaine." Zio repeated the name as her state of mind suddenly recovered. Beside them, there was a bronze cross and a ghostly blue gem that resembled a vertical eye on the table. The gem's exterior had thread-like patterns, the beyonder characteristic that appeared after Charmaine's death. It made the things around it appear mild, and it accentuated their beauty. However, with the bronze cross around, its glow was confined to a small area. "That monitor is one of the culprits behind Charmaine's death," Zio said rather seriously. They had already found a spot to bury Charmaine, and Furs had flipped through Lamino's travels to placate the dead Charmaine. Furs immediately nodded. "Yes, it's why she was instigated to investigate the king's secret and come into contact with the latent danger. Didn't you say that she might be able to monitor where we used to live? We can find an opportunity to return incognito, throw a letter into the mailbox, and write that Viscount Stratford is loyal to King George III and that he has a huge secret. This way, I believe she will be able to see it." Zio thought carefully and nodded solemnly. "Okay." After discussing what they were about to do next, first stood up and pointed at the bronze cross. "It's time for us to show our sincerity to Mr. Fool for all the help we received. I plan on sacrificing it to Mr. Fool now. You don't have any objections, right?" "No," Zio replied without hesitation. Mager Manor. It was another evening. The news sent back by Kona's Kilgore's family was to wait, since this MI9 deputy director often acted in such ways, involving himself in matters of national security. Therefore, Mocked and company didn't panic. They made use of the animals they hunted and roasted them over a bonfire at a party on the lawn behind the manor. Seeing the gentlemen roll up their sleeves and busy themselves around the roasting rack, the ladies heading over to help from time to time, and the children running around eagerly, Klein held a cup of sweet white wine, a fine product of Mager Manor, and sat on a white wooden chair, a smile suffusing his lips. Beside him was his mixed-blood valet, Anuni, who stood upright while awaiting instructions. And inside a particular room in the manor's main building, a pair of eyes were silently looking down. It belonged to a person who looked identical to Anuni. The evening breeze blew past. Just as Klein was about to get up and showcase what it meant to roast meat from Desi at the roasting rack, he suddenly saw a figure phase into existence in front of him. It was Ariana, who wore a simple robe and tree bark as a belt. This servant of concealment looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, "There was nothing special in the underground ruins." She then recounted the main points of what she and the three archbishops saw, as well as the explanation given by Prince of Sonia, Grove Augustus. That doesn't make sense. The first thought that appeared in Klein's mind was suspicion. As Viscount Stratford had Saintess of White Katerina provide him with assistance, this clearly meant that the king's faction hadn't completely severed ties with the Demonist sect. Under the premise that the Great Smog of Backlund had already happened, their continued relationship with the Demonist sect meant that it wasn't something that could be explained as hoping to keep the Blood Emperor's ruins for themselves with such in-depth cooperation. Would the Demonist sect and psychology alchemists not wish to split the spoils? In that case, why wouldn't they directly seek the help of the three churches? Klein instinctively believed that the problem with the ruins hadn't truly been discovered. He suspected that there had been a leak during the entire process, allowing the king to make preparations. With Mam Ariana around, the possibility of discovering something amiss via the methods of divination and prophecy can be eliminated. From my killing of Kona's Kilgore to the three churches' joint operation, the number of people who know of it doesn't exceed 10. Furthermore, they all involve the high-ranking members of each church. How is it possible that there was a leak? Viscount Stratford's problem resulted in the people in the ruins deploying contingency plans? No, his standing wasn't at that level. Even Kona's Kilgore didn't know the exact situation, much less him. He was only in charge of liaising with the Demonist sect and handling matters at the periphery. He might not even know of the underground ruins. Klein's thoughts raced as he sought the reasons. He first eliminated the possibility of them being prepared due to Viscount Stratford. After all, the death of the captain of the Royal Guards wasn't that important or crucial. As such, there were very few possibilities that could explain the situation. 1. A person who knew of the secret amidst this sequence of events had deliberately or unintentionally leaked the matter due to particular reasons. 2. They had noticed something wrong with Kona's Kilgore's seemingly ordinary state, but Klein didn't notice anything. The psychology alchemists are in cahoots as well. Could my thoughts be read and the secret revealed? But I have the gray fog augmenting me. No matter what, there will be some abnormality. It's just like when I faced that spectator demigod with Anderson. The psychology alchemists originated from something Hermes left behind. Hermes is. As he thought about it, Klein's eyes suddenly widened. He instinctively stopped himself from thinking deeper about it as he shot a look at Ariana and relaxed. He asked, "Is this place concealed?" "Very," Ariana replied calmly. People behind her came and went, but no one noticed her. Klein exhaled as he formulated his thoughts. Emperor Roselle once said in his diary that the members of that ancient secret organization are all important figures. Then, could it be possible that one of the high-ranking members of the three churches is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order? And could it be that the ruins which Ariana and the Archbishop saw wasn't the real one, but one imagined by Adam? You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.